is Tom Marcella, and I'm the Director of Special Events for Student University Programmers. I'd like to thank you all for coming to our last lecture event tonight. As you may or may not know, this event's based off of the last lecture given by Randy Pausch, who was a professor at Carnegie Mellon. He was diagnosed with cancer and found out he only had a few months left to live. So he gave his last lecture, which was titled "Really Achieving Your Childhood Dreams." Here at Rowan, we put out a poll to the students, and they voted on and decided who out of the faculty and staff they wanted to see give their hypothetical last lecture. So without further ado, I'd like to bring to the stage Dr. Casper from the Management Department.
Who was it that the student selected? Thank you. I'm looking at 3 or 4 microphones, but I think you can hear me, and I'll talk loud like I usually do. It is very gratifying to see you all here. Very humbled by this experience, very appreciative. Thanks to the SUP group who brought their own pirate flag. Love it. And Tom Marcella especially for all the work he's done. I do want to thank Joel. Joel, stand up in the back. Joel is my HR mentor, brought me here. I worked with him every day. He's the only Canadian. I'll just stop there. I want to thank my wife, Tammy. Tammy, would you also stand up in case you have not met everybody here? For her ongoing support. About 7 or 8 years ago, I'm in HR, so I don't really want to stop and count. Numbers aren't my strong suit. But I returned to PhD school or college after 20 years of industry work, and that was tough. I won't really call it a commute because my family stayed in San Antonio, and I moved to Oklahoma State University up in Stillwater. And she maintained the household and took care of everything while I was gone. So I'm very appreciative of that, and know that without her I wouldn't have the opportunity to be here. Now, saying that, I'm happy to be here after several weeks of navel gazing. I am ready to get this over with. Do you know what navel gazing means? I actually looked this up. Anyone? Navel gazing? Daniel? You're looking at your navel. Very literal. That's good. Introspection and looking at yourself especially doesn't have a positive connotation per se, but it does indicate you're looking at yourself. You're doing some introspection, and that's what I've been doing as I've been looking at myself, my history, why I'm here, and I'm going to share that with you this evening. Now, at the end of each of my semesters, I have what I call a last lecture, where the students and I go to the front of the room, kind of get out behind the desks, put the chairs up front, and we talk about stuff. Talk about careers, talk about success, talk about ethics. We talk about a lot of things that I'm not going to talk about with this audience. Any questions about things that go on in the workplace, what HR has to deal with? I tell some of my fun stories. And we talk about what it means to be successful and have ethics in the workplace at the same time. I thought that this program or this talk, this lecture would just be augmenting that. It turned into a lot more than that. As I looked through and I wondered why maybe I got the votes, I thought maybe it was because people want to know why I'm here, why I left corporate America. And then I thought, no, it's probably because I told them the last lecture meant they didn't have to come to class anymore. I'm not quite sure which one it was. So what I'm going to do is talk about my career, my entrance into academia, tonight in much more detail than I ever have before. I'm going to I'm going to share with you some of the details of my life, of the decisions that I've made, in hopes that you might find something of use. This is my last lecture, per se. This is when I think about, if I were to die tomorrow or in a couple of weeks, what would I want to tell you? So, just want to make sure the dean is looking at the screen as I'm talking. Most people who win this award are tenured, and I don't happen to be tenured, so I wanted to just make sure we have the ground rules in place, that no matter what I said, wouldn't be fired. Now, the first part we're going to talk about is happiness. Where do you think you get happiness from? In a lot of the twin studies, you've heard of the twin studies, talk about happiness being genetics or physical, part of your genes, even as much as 48%. 40% can be event or life-related, your job or your marriage or any number of things. 12%? Well, a recent study from Louisiana states that it comes from watching Duck Dynasty every Thursday. I wouldn't feel comfortable talking about my happiness or happiness in my career without talking about some of the things that I've been through. This is a photograph of my back as it's been pieced together after not a long history of surgeries, but after a few surgeries. And it causes me a lot of pain. I deal with this pain a lot. I don't know if you can see that. But while they were in there, I had them install cable TV remote, so I can actually change the channel with my butt. It's a neurostimulator. It tries to lessen the pain. So that's something that I deal with, and that altered my life around 2005 and 2006, although I had dealt with it earlier than that. Now, when we talk about happiness, what makes you happy, things from within, maybe your girlfriend or all sorts of things might give you happiness. But really, happiness is a chemical reaction, right? Dopamine, serotonin, technically the only two things you enjoy. And when we talked about the 48% coming genetically or physically, if that gets messed up, you might have a problem. Might have a little problem with your happiness. Now, that doesn't happen all the time, but it happens sometimes. Primarily, it shows when you're about college age, if you do have it. And what I mean, if I had it, is MDD, or major depressive disorder, also called depression. It's something that I struggle with on a regular basis, that I manage, and then I'm able to work through. The reason I tell you this is that there's a stigma attached to it, a stigma that we should do away with, but there's still a stigma attached to it. And what I was saying about college-aged kids, 20 to 30, is when it most often appears. And this also is the age that you don't want to go to the doctor, that you don't want to talk to somebody, but it's important. MDD will make you sad, but it's not about sadness. It's not about the Eagles losing and you're not being too happy, or you missed question 20 7. Faley's was at number 27 then. Yeah. There's something far greater than that. Now, Dr. Pausch, Randy, in his last lecture, talked a lot about it's not the cards you're dealt, but how you play your hand. I left corporate America because of several reasons. It wasn't motivating me any longer. I was trying to work on my health issues. I had an opportunity to leave. There are many reasons why I left, but there was an emergent opportunity that came my way to go to school and to get a PhD and to be here where I am today. And I took that emergent opportunity. I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to talk a lot more about that. Sometimes the worst things that happen to you can also be the best things that happen to you. Now, can anybody think of famous people that have also had MDD? Please.
Abraham Lincoln.
My magic trick, just put that name on the board. Just one name. But there's a few others. Again, just kind of a partial list. And I think, and I heard somebody say this the other day, that we should take the stigma away of talking about this particular issue. We should be able to talk about it just like we talk about high blood pressure or high cholesterol or other problems. Should not be stigmatized. I know when I was in human resources, somebody came to me and they broke their leg. Boy, was I sympathetic and empathetic. Or they had dialysis. Great, I took care of that. But somebody came in and talked about mental issues with me. I wasn't so sure about that. Well, I understand it a lot better now. And I hope that others will too. Now, I want to talk a little bit about myself. Randy Pausch, Dr. Pausch. The last lecture's been going on for a long time. The first one was kind of 1955 at UCLA. They asked some professors that were retiring to come in and do their last lecture. Randy Pausch was actually chosen at Carnegie Mellon. They called it Voyages at the time. And then he chose the topic of doing it on achieving your childhood dreams. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. Some of you non-readers out there, I don't want to look because I'll give it away, but you can also watch it on YouTube. We are all dying. This is pictures of me growing and dying. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So I'm not unique because I'm dying. Randy Pausch was. He had been chosen. He was unique because he chose to talk about or give his last lecture even though he was dying. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. A week or so after, he was selected to give the lecture. And it was a very difficult decision for him to go ahead and give the lecture because it took a lot of time to prepare. It took a lot of time for me to find some of these pictures. I gotta show this one again, right? My kids like the afros. They're always liking the photos that I have of the afros. But he chose to talk about it. He wanted to talk about living. He wanted, while he was dying, he wanted to tell people how to live. He said in his talks he wasn't going to talk about his cancer or his illness. He wasn't going to talk about his family. And he wasn't going to talk about religion or spirituality. And then he ended up talking about all three. But the first thing he said was that he did have a deathbed conversion. And he bought a Mac. So, who am I? Where did I come from? What do I do? I am a genealogist, and I do a lot of studying of genealogies in my family history. I have tens of thousands of names identified. As a matter of fact, I have a pretty nifty website that I made called hastenfamilysearch.org, where you could too go in and do your genealogy and learn how to do it. But I did a DNA test this year, and it shows where my ancestry came from. Now, it was primarily from Great Britain. We thought it was German, but primarily from Great Britain. As a matter of fact, I'm more British than a native Brit. They give percentages and things like that, like they know what they're talking about. Oh, well, it's 68%. It's like the numbers we talk about in academia, 68%. The range, what's the range? The standard deviation? Well, the standard deviation is 45. And the upper range, well, so my DNA is primarily United Kingdom, some from the North countries, some from the Iberian Peninsula, and from Africa. So I've got some finding to do. I'm going to stop focusing on my German ancestry and start looking into United Kingdom and Benin, Togo. All the last lectures that I saw also have a tribute to their parents, and I also won the parent lottery. This is my parents. I just have to say she's really beautiful. It's a 59 Plymouth Belvedere. Now I did win the parent. If I did not choose my parents, I would have. They're wonderful people. My dad gave up for his marriage, that.
Wow.
56 Jag, 140 MK hardtop coupe in white. So I do appreciate the sacrifices, Mom and Dad, but this is what I remember. I remember 3 of these being towed into the driveway and making one. I remember a case of spray paint that we bought down at the Ace, painted it green. We put black stripes on it. Great memories. Let me show you that. Okay, great memories. Okay. Then everybody lost their minds. And we got a gremlin. It did have a nice 8-track tape player in it, though. My parents read to me. They spent time with me. Us. I have siblings. Some of you might recognize these books. They're not the most recent, but they're the books I grew up on. I still remember Ricky Tiki Timbo. Anyone? Nasa Rimbo? Jerry? Yeah. Terry Pembo. I actually looked it up because I was kind of working through it, but you remember that? Wonderful. My parents always engaged in the good fight. It was Red Cross volunteers, Day Center for the Homeless, Toys for Tots, Meals on Wheels, Emergency Infant Services, whatever it was, they were involved. Is that on? My parents couldn't be here today. My mom, Sherry, had some tumors taken out of her head a couple of years ago. And to my dad, I'm Cam, your favorite child. There's Kimberly, she's the oldest daughter. She's been teaching at a junior college or a community college for 26 years as her master's in nutrition. Kyle, who is most like you, a draftsperson. He got an architectural degree at one of those small schools by where Bob lives in Boston. What is it? MIT, yeah. And my youngest sister lives in DC with 4 beautiful children. But I want to say thanks to my parents. Couldn't be here, but I know you're here in spirit, for all the values and beliefs that you were shared with me as I grew up. I remember all of those lessons that you took me to because I couldn't speak right, and all the extra classes I had to go to, and learn how to draw with both hands, answer questions, and say my S's. Got lots of M&Ms, I remember that much. Thank you. Now, again, parents, as we're going to talk about happiness and success and how people measure success. I always think about this clip from a show. There are 2 people on here, happen to be, I think, Joel, I think they're both Canadians. Yeah, they actually are. That's not why I chose the clip. But
Good reason.
it's a show called Blast from the Past. I had to get it off of VHS. That's one of those tape-looking things. So the sound is a little bit off, but it talks about lessons that you might learn from your parents, about being kind. And I think it talks to how important it is to be with your family, to teach them, and maybe not outsource as much through memos, but to teach your children.
Perfect table manners.
You know, I asked him about that. He said, good manners are just a way of showing other people that we have respect for them. See, I didn't know that. I thought it was just a way of acting all superior. Oh, you know what else he told me?
What?
He thinks I'm a gentleman and you're a lady.
Well, consider the source. I don't even know what a lady is.
I know. I mean, I thought a gentleman was somebody that owned horses. But it turns out the short and simple definition of a lady or a gentleman is someone who always tries to make sure that the people around him or her are as comfortable as possible.
Where do you think he got all that information?
Off from the oddest place. His parents. I mean, I don't think I got that memo from mine.
So that was when Brandon Fraser was raised by his parents in a bunker. So it was just them together. There's a lot of neat ideas and thoughts in that movie. I think it only got 48% at Rotten Tomatoes. You may not have seen it. So, what has made me who I am? And what are the choices that have delivered me to this spot? Well, certainly we've talked about my wonderful parents and the upbringing, the values, the beliefs that they've shared with me. From the earliest memories I have, we've delivered Christmas presents to people who were out of work and things like that. But who am I? Now, this was my first career as a male model. Is that, I mean, look at that suit. Kim, am I wrong? Is that a good looking suit? God. My neighbor worked at the store. Clearly there's a reason why I didn't go into basketball. You'll see a lot of me in the newspaper, the local newspaper. I had a friend who happened to be a girl that worked at the local newspaper. So I got a lot of my memories through there. I was very active in the government and all sorts of things. Honor Society. Actually, as a member of the union, I got a large scholarship to go to college. I had worked in a union environment. And maybe most of all, what defined me I hit the click button, but nothing happened. I'm going to try again. Here's my 1968 El Camino. And the Nikes with the red shoelaces. They're not bad either, but spent a lot of time working on cars. I worked from the age I was 14 in grocery stores and otherwise, earning money for my car because I wrecked it a lot. And I just told my daughter, Chloe, this story the other day. And I really wasn't supposed to tell any of my children that I spent some time in Brazil when I was 20. The mail caught up to me and revoked my license and my insurance. But I had already left the country at that time, so. One of my jobs, to save money to do a mission or do service work for my church. It's be on the back of a garbage truck. So I consider that actually my first career. So I selected, after my teenage years, to put in some paperwork and to volunteer. Some of you may be familiar with the notion. I volunteered and was selected to go to Brazil, South American country, just way down there in the corner. Learned a lot. I learned how to speak Portuguese. I learned to work hard. I learned to spend 15 hours a day serving interests other than my own. Whether that be talking about the scriptures, or whether that be helping people build their houses. Now, what I also discovered as I was looking back through this paraphernalia, or it's probably not the right word. Actually, I give a lecture called Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll in the Workplace. You should all come for that one too. But some of the things I've found would surprise you. But going away from paraphernalia, I remembered, there's a quote here. It said, it asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I said, get a doctorate and teach at the college level. I didn't remember that. I hadn't remembered that. Now, Brazil was a little bit different. It was way out in the country of Brazil. I learned, among other things, about the comforts of life. There was no hot water anywhere. So you'll see that's a pipe coming in. It's not a great picture. Cold water. I had just free-wired a shower head with the coil in it. So the cold water comes through there, drips through the hot water coil that's powered by that loose wire. It probably should have had some tape on it. And it's dripping water. And we seem to think there's no problem with that. When I came back from Brazil, I met the love of my life, Tammy. We were married. The date here may be incorrect, as my daughter pointed out to me, but I forgot to look it up. I'm going to go with 1987. Isn't she beautiful? About 10 years later, our family's complete. Now, this is Chloe. Chloe, would you stand up and turn around, please? All right. The same hot water that makes an egg harden makes a carrot soften. So I know with my children, Chloe wouldn't mind standing up, but if I ask my son to stand up, bad things are going to happen. He's over there. These are Tammy's parents, Bob and Janice, who are with us today. They came down from Rhode Island. Bob and Janice, would you stand up? Janice, how many grandchildren do you have?
35.
Senior Chief, how many years were you in the Navy?
38.
It's a picture of their 50th wedding anniversary. Tammy made me promise that I wouldn't stand here and talk about this for a long time, but this is her 40th birthday. All right. So, watching the time here. School, went to Brigham Young University, undergraduate in psychology, MBA, where I focused on organizational psychology, business, and took a development program. After my master's degree, I went into a development program in human resources at Chevron. We spent time in a lot of different places, Denver, San Francisco, a couple places in Houston. Spent some time with Chevron, again, on human resources developmental assignments. Then I left and went to a company called Allied Signal. They were a joint venture between Allied Signal and General Motors at the time. I only stayed there for a couple of years. They were being sold. We were selling them. We were selling ourselves. Then again in human resources, I went to a financial services company where I was the vice president of human resources for a large servicing group, an operational group located in San Antonio at that time. I spent about 10 years there doing just about everything in HR. When I left, I started a little consulting company called Elevate Human Resources. You've probably heard of it. Then is when I started, after a year or so, I went to Oklahoma State University and entered into their PhD, full-time PhD program, management. You know, when Joel called me, I don't know, called me or emailed me or sent me a letter or whatever we did, I proudly announced to my friends that I was now going to be a Rowan owl. Who would have thought they were called the profs? Okay, so I'm interviewing at Rowan, or trying to, and there's this little storm sweeping in, Sandy. And I called Joel. I said, Joel, looks like I can't get here. He said, you need to come because we've scheduled it. There's a storm, but you need to come. Next day, they canceled all my plane tickets. And so we're just not flying to the coast. I called Joel. He said, we've got a local candidate that we're looking at. If you don't get here, we're going to hire her. So I'm thinking about driving, buses. He says, these things never hit. You'll be fine. Just go to the airport. So the day of, I'm still trying to get here and decide that this other person could have the job because there's no way I can get here. After the storm, I called Joel, or he called me, and suggested that it was probably okay that I come the next week, that the local person couldn't get here either. Now, this is one of my favorite graphs. It tells a little bit of story about when I leave the company. I'm just saying. So, if the stock price is $500 and you have 1,000 stock options, well, actually the stock price was $50, but they had to show it like this because it had so many reverse splits. let's just say the stock price was 50 and your stock options have an issue price 25, strike price is 50, and you've got 10,000 options, you've got some money there and leverage. But once it goes below that strike price, your 100,000 stock options may not be worth 2.5 million anymore, and they might be worth nothing. Now, I'm not saying that that's my story. I wish it were my story. But even if you have stock at 10,000 options or 10,000 shares of stock and it goes from 50 to less than $1, that's a pretty significant move. So I sold my Porsche and read this book, Alexander, Who Used to Be Rich, last Sunday. It's a great book about a guy who has $1 and goes and spends it. So as I left my last employer, started out on our own, we were a little bit worried about where the funds were going to come from, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that happens when you're looking at emergent strategies that enter your life. You don't always, you might want to write this down, you don't always control everything that happens to you. So who am I? I love my HR history. I did all these things and I was going to walk through them one by one, but it bored me after the first one, so I'm not going to do that. I've done generalist roles in human resources across 3 different industries. Why did I get into human resources? Because I was sitting at a lecture one day and the kid next to me said that, I asked him what his major was, he asked me what mine was, he said his was human resources, and that sounded really cool. That was it. So I did more organizational psychology work because we didn't have a major in human resources. But I love human resources. I think management is a noble calling. Why is it a noble calling? Because you can actually affect the personal lives, the happiness of people that work for you. Here's a story. A story about a guy. I'll read this so I don't get it wrong. Let me tell you a story about a guy. He did the same work for 2 different companies. The same job at 2 different companies. I actually just repeated that line. He loved one and hated the other. That's the story of management and human resources and how you can affect somebody's life. You may be a great engineer, and that may be your calling in life and your vocation. But as managers and people in management, we have the opportunity to make things motivational and satisfying for people, or just the opposite. So, what is your dream job? Not all of you can be an HR manager, but for those 2 who can, I left it on there, Parker. He told me I was going to get edited, but I didn't let anybody see it who would edit it. Live in Montana, right? 90% of us are going to have severe regrets about not reaching our goals. That's like everybody, except for 10%. So what do you do with that happiness? What do you do with that lack of happiness? Well, severe regrets are not unhappiness. They're just, well, I have a dream to be the president, but not everybody gets to be the president. So we're going to talk now about, realistically, how you choose your options, how you get into a dream job, how you get into a job that motivates you and gives you the satisfaction that you may be looking for in a career. We're going to go way back. We're going to talk about Maslow. We're going to talk about Hertzberg's theory of motivation. If you'll remember, the 2-factor theory has hygiene factors. Hygiene factors are those factors that just maintain you. There's things that happen to you. Your compensation, job security, things like that. You have to work on this phrase a little bit. You got to chew on it to understand it. the best I can give you is lack of unhappiness. If my compensation is right, it's not going to make me happy, but it won't make me unhappy. Now, there are things called motivational factors, the other half of the factor theory. These are what the noble work of managers in HR can produce. Challenging work, recognition, responsibility. You can have the same job at two different companies and they're not structured the same, and you don't get this. Motivators relating to Maslow's theory of achievement, competency, status, personal worth, and self-realization come from doing things that you like, that are challenging to you, that give you individual growth and opportunity. Did a project. It was more than a project. We have a big grant with the Material Handlers Association, and we work through warehouses, making them worker-centric. There's a website on it if you want to look at it. But our basic design idea is, if I were to design a warehouse that my children would work in, what would it look like? So as you look for, oops, got one more button there. There it is. Motivation factors can give you satisfaction and happiness. Now, what I remember going to one of my theory classes on motivation, and I had this presentation. It was on motivation. And I said, a happy worker does not necessarily equal a productive worker. And I remember the professor argued with me. She was just mad. Yes, it does. And I said, no, it doesn't. At that point in time, I would have thought about this. I've dealt with this for a long time. Yeah, I can be happy if I have a job where I get 6 months off per year, vacation, and I get paid a lot of money. I don't have to do a lot of work. That's going to make me happy, but that's not a very productive worker. So there's been some arguments around Hertzberg's theory, but there's a book, a little bit less scientific than the original findings. It's called Break All the Rules. And it gives current support to Hertzberg's two-factor theory, that this happiness drives productivity. Now, everybody quotes Steve Jobs when they give a talk like this, so I will as well. The only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you love. Choose a job you love and you'll never work a day of your life. So why do we settle? Why do we stick? Why do we look for compensation or recognition or factors like that that are in the hygiene area? How do we get stuck up in that hygiene factor and not find that job that we love? Well, it's like the guy who goes into Baskin-Robbins 31 flavors. You know why it's 31 flavors? Because there's one flavor for every day of the month. I bet none of you do that. Baskin-Robbins, I want vanilla. Why do you want vanilla? Why don't you try one of the other flavors? I've never tried any of the other flavors. I just like vanilla. The next kid, I want vanilla. Why do you want vanilla? I've tried all of the 31 other flavors, and I like vanilla best. Both of them wanted vanilla. One of them understood the motivational factor behind that. The best way you can understand job motivation and what motivates you is to get as much experience, internships, looking around, trying to figure out what you enjoy. As they say, what makes your heart sing? In management, we have a theory, March and Simon, 1958, satisficing versus optimizing. Satisficing, that's a needle in the haystack, by the way. Satisficing would be finding one needle in this haystack that is sharp enough to sew on a needle. Optimizing would be finding every needle in this haystack and locating the sharpest one to sew on a needle. You aren't going to be able to try every job in the world. You've got to figure out where that satisficing meets the optimal standards, but you've got to give it an effort. You can't just stick with that first opportunity, that first flavor. More about happiness. Social comparison theory. You may have heard of this, but I'm not going to be happy unless I do better than you. And that is not good. That's something that we all need to consider and think about. It's also called Schadenfreude. You've probably heard this word. It's been popular back and forth, but it means enjoying somebody else's failures. But I found this word, and I asked my Jewish Yiddish German expert. Nobody else seems to have heard of it except Natchez, which means deriving pleasure from the achievement of others. The greatest source of long-term happiness is from your family relationships. Getting bored with the new job, getting bored with the spouse, the girlfriend, the school. You're supposed to. Now, philosophic stagnation means that once you have a passionate happiness or satisfaction with something, the rules change a little bit. You have to go into a companionship, a companion interaction. It allows for other activities such as playing video games and going to work, rather than pursuing that thing that you love or going to your jag and polishing it and washing it every day or spending all day long with your girlfriend. When you're in a new job or new area, just because it gets boring after a year or two doesn't mean that you don't like it. It doesn't mean that it's not motivating or the right thing for you. Same with marriage. Same with a lot of things in life. So how long does it last? How long is this honeymoon effect? Well, that's something you need to understand for yourself. Where are you spending your resources? I want to get into sequencing. I know that I'm running low on time here. Sequencing. When my young career aspirants look for a job and a career, they go to maybe law school or to a management place. Management place, that sounds very technical. You're going to spend a lot of hours, right? In your first job, what else are you trying to do? What age are you? You might be trying to have a relationship, raise children, be a part of your community. When you're older in your career, you spend less time, or can spend less time there. So how do you sequence that? Well, that's something you need to have as a strategy, because a lot of fathers, a lot of mothers have outsourced the raising of their families and the children in the relationship, and they find out that when they finally made it, they're alone. Because they haven't sequenced, they haven't spent the time with those relationships that are important to them, that create the real happiness in life. Emergent strategy. So, if you're in 2006, you've been 20 years in human resources, you've got a little bit of a health problem, you start doing a consulting company, you don't really like that. You might have an emergent strategy come forward, which is another way of saying an opportunity. Just because you say you want to be an engineer or a bricklayer when you're 12 doesn't mean that when you're 24 or 35 that you still need to be in that career. As a matter of fact, they say that by the time you're 32, you'll have 8 career changes. The new environment with the Protein Employment Agreement, many of you will have many more career changes than that. Strategy rarely presents itself all at once. When emergent appears, switch to deliberative. I have gone through emergent strategy, got a PhD, and now my deliberate strategy must be getting tenure. All right, so we're on our final topic. Staying out of jail. That's a good thing. What I like to say about it is the smaller the indiscretion, the easier it is to commit. When I worked at Safeway, I was a teenager, there was a return to vendor basket in the back room. Things that got smashed and crashed and broken went in there. I remember one night, I was tired, I was hungry, I walked by it. We're not supposed to eat the stuff out of it, it's kind of gross if you think about it, but there was a package of donuts in there. I grabbed one and I ate it. And I started feeling bad about it. I didn't start feeling bad, I started feeling bad about it because I broke into the package. That was a small discretion. You know, I felt bad about it and I felt worse about it, and I went to the manager and I told him what I had done. And said, you know what, we have put that there as a trap because people have been stealing from us, and in the morning you would have been fired had that been something that you had done. I thought, wow, good thing I came and paid my $2 and got that, but was my integrity worth $2? There's a scam that happens a lot of times in procurement departments. Somebody will call with a great deal on office supplies. Sure, I'll take a truckload. Oh, by the way, I'm just going to throw these Yankees tickets on top. We're going to throw them away if you don't want them. Whatever, just throw them on top. They don't require a reply or a statement. Next week they have some more even cheaper office supplies. Another gift comes. Sooner or later, you're requesting gifts out of a catalog, and the price of those office supplies goes up. And then I get suspicious and look, or somebody in the workplace gets suspicious, looks in the trash can and finds all sorts of things that don't belong there. China boxes that had been filled with China plates and patterns and different things. We look around and discover the place is filled with office supplies. And the guy had done a very small, marginal act that had been caught up into a scam. He went to jail. Do not commit large infractions. But typically you're not confronted with large infractions. You're confronted with small infractions called marginal thinking. And when I talk about ethics, I talk about stay away from that marginal thinking. Now, let's talk about childhood dreams. That was what Dr. Pausch's original statement was. Do these sound like any of your childhood dreams? Probably not. How about these? This is better, right? I don't think many kids sit down and say, I want to be really, really happy, but I think most everybody shares those childhood dreams about happiness, success in their careers, being motivated for their careers, being happy to wake up in the morning to go to work, staying out of jail. So for me, I'm part of the Protein Employment Proteus. That's what we call a new employment contract. Some of you may have heard of it. Proteus was a Greek sea god of change, the water roiling, the sea mass and everything, just being indicative of change. And this protean employment means flexibility, versatility, and adaptability. And it's what the new employment contract is going to be. I would have thought I could have been here after 20 years. I loved my work in HR. Things changed for me. Emergent strategy came forward for me, and I took the opportunity. I love my time with my students. I love the time in the classroom. And I hope that each of you find that ability as well. Now, life isn't always going to be easy. People will go through trials. I know some of you right now are going through some major trials. There's a poem called Good Timber by Douglas Malloy, and I've quoted this poem for some time. The third verse really says it all. Good timber does not grow with ease, the stronger wind, the stronger trees, the further sky, the greater length. The more the storm, the more the strength. By sun and cold, by rain and snow, and trees and men, good timbers grow. Your trials and tribulations may be bigger or lesser than others, but they're yours. And they're everybody's. And as management, human resources, I'm speaking to most of my people, and as people we can make the world a better place, make the world better for a stranger, make the world better for our family, create some level of happiness. We've done a great deal. I'm going to show you a couple of final pictures here. If you'll notice in the program, that's the head from the program shot. My daughter spent some time also doing volunteer work, learning to speak Spanish. That's her coming home at the airport. That's Hannah. Whoops. That's Adam, my oldest son, spent volunteer work, learned Spanish as well. That's my oldest daughter, Michaela. And this is my grandbaby, Savannah, and a couple of people. So, seek with passion, seek with vengeance your education. It will give you freedom. Seek motivating and differing job experiences so you can learn what makes you happy. Look for proper resource allocation where you spend your time and energy and sequencing in your lives. Make purposeful plans with the strategy of your life to have a successful career, successful family, happiness, and good ethics, staying out of jail. One other way to do that is to surround yourself with people that will lift you up, with quality people. I have a lot of quality people here that are part of my circle that helps me, family, friends, colleagues, mentors, bosses, mentees, mentos, co-workers. So, as you develop these relationships, look for people to help you with your purposeful strategy in doing, in making, in meeting your childhood dreams and goals of being crazy happy, of having a wonderful career and a wonderful life, fulfilling deep relationships. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Casper, for coming out and sharing your hypothetical last lecture with us. On behalf of SUP, I'd like to present with you a token of our appreciation. And I'd like to invite you all out to the foyer for some refreshments. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming.